Hello everyone, and welcome to your fourth lesson on the B18 topic, which is all about deforestation and peat destruction. So by the end of this lesson you need to be able to describe what forest deforestation and peat bog destruction are and how they happen, and you need to be able to link the loss of forests and peat bogs to the environmental effects. Your quick task is to think back to the carbon cycle, which we learned about in the B17 topic. Try and recall what processes put carbon into the atmosphere and what takes carbon out of the atmosphere. What I'd like you to do is pause the video, write down your title, date and objectives, complete the quick task and then press play when you're ready. So hopefully when you've looked back at your carbon cycle work, or maybe you've remembered it, you can recall that the following processes put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So burning biomass, so that means burning things like trees or plants, burning fossil fuels, the respiration, so all living organisms in the world respire and give off carbon dioxide, and also decay processes. All of those things put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. There is only one process that takes carbon out of the atmosphere, that's photosynthesis, and it's done by plants or photosynthetic plankton in the seas. What happens is they take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it as part of their biomass. For your starter activity, what I'd like you to do is have a look at this image, and you need to try and explain what it's showing. You can just do it by thinking about it and structuring an answer in your head. You could write down some bullet points, or if you're watching this video with someone, you could maybe discuss it with them. So pause the video and press play when you're ready for an explanation. Okay, as you can see, this is an image of a forest and it's being destroyed, and the forest has been made into two lung shapes like this, with this is what would be sort of the trachea and then the bronchi and the bronchioles and so forth, and this area is being destroyed. And the reason it's been made into a lung shape is because we could say, and some people would say, that the rainforest is a bit like the lungs of the earth. It's what takes the carbon out of the atmosphere and puts oxygen into the atmosphere, and we need oxygen in order to respire and in order to live. All living things need oxygen in order to live. So obviously destroying the rainforest is going to be bad for our planet. So why do we chop down the rainforest? Well, here are some images to show you some of the uses of the land after we destroy the rainforest. So in this picture here, you can see that the rainforest, the trees in the rainforest have been chopped down, and there's these little piles of logs here. So one of the reasons we chop down the rainforest is to use the timber or wood for constructing new buildings and so forth, or we use the wood for paper, or we use it for fuel. This image here is corn crop. Now we could grow some corn and eat it, but actually one of the uses of corn being grown is to make biofuel. So the corn is fermented using yeast to make alcohol, and that alcohol is a fuel that we can burn in biofuel cars. So the next reason we chop down the rainforest is to grow crops to make biofuel. One of the main reasons, certainly in America, the Americas actually, why the rainforest is being chopped down is so that they can use the land to farm cattle. So as the human population grows, there's an increased desire to eat meat by the population, and as I say, you chop down the rainforest, you grow cattle on the land instead. And in more East Asian countries, what you tend to find is that deforestation occurs and the land is converted into rice paddy fields. So as you can see, these little plants here are growing in very damp conditions, very wet conditions. Those are the conditions that rice crops prefer to grow in. Now, one of the problems both with the cows here and the rice paddy fields here is that a lot of methane is given off. So in this water here, there's a lot of breakdown of plant matter, and methane gas is given off, and methane gas is a greenhouse gas, so that's not good for the environment, of course. The reason I've included this image is just to show you one of the things you've probably seen and read or heard about a lot is palm oil. So palm oil itself isn't bad. It's actually a really good crop that produces a high yield, a high amount of oil. So palm oil isn't the problem, but chopping down the rainforest is. So some companies have removed palm oil altogether from their foods, but that's not really solving the problem. Actually, what you need to do is stop chopping the rainforest down and start producing all oils in a biosustainable way, in a more sustainable way. Okay, so to cover the first part of this video, we've got some keynotes here with words missing. They're at the bottom of the screen. So what I'd like to do is complete the gap fill activity in your books, fill the correct words in the correct gap, and then we'll go through the answers on the next slide. So pause the video, and then when you're ready for the answers, press play. And here are your answers. Deforestation occurs because the growing human population use timber from trees and use the land for farming animals, growing food crops, or growing biofuel crops. Slash and burn deforestation is where trees are cut down and burned. This is really bad for global warming, as the dead trees can no longer remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and burning their biomass releases additional carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So just to talk through really quickly about slash and burn deforestation. So here's what we've got first of all, a lovely biodiverse rainforest with lots of different organisms living happily there. And then humans come along and not only do they chop down the trees, but in order to clear the land easily so they don't have to transport the timber away or because they don't want that timber, they just burn it down. So not only, so let's have a look, let's say this is the atmosphere. And there's a bit of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. What happens is that carbon dioxide would have been taken up by the trees in the rainforest, but instead of that happening, now the trees are dead, they can't photosynthesize, they can't take the carbon out of the atmosphere. And what happens is we burn the trees down, releasing even more carbon into the atmosphere. And on top of that, it's not just like a double whammy of bad carbon stuff or double whammy for the old global warming situation, it's a triple whammy because cows that are sort of farmed en masse in America. So you can see, look at this picture, how many cows there are. Each cow burps and farts between 160 and 320 litres of methane per cow per day. And methane is also a greenhouse gas. So we mentioned that during when we were talking about the rice paddy fields, and it's also relevant to cows. So now the cows are adding CH4, which is methane, CH4. So we're really throwing our atmosphere out of whack with all of these activities. So not only do we chop the rainforest down, we then burn it and then farm cows on it. And that's just adding a lot more carbon and a lot more methane into the atmosphere. So yeah, really bad for global warming. Okay, so other problems associated with rainforest destruction is loss of biodiversity. So in the 18.1 video, we looked at some of the plants that are useful for humans. So for example, aspirin originally comes from like willow trees, and witch hazel is a really important anti-inflammatory plant. And there are many, many plants out there that we still haven't discovered that could like have lots of important medical benefits. There could even be something like a cure for cancer out there. But if we kill all these plants and animals before we discover them, we can't use them for we can't use them in the future for like medicine or food. So in the rainforest, there are potential species that we can't discover if we've destroyed them already. The second point here is that there's an impact on organisms in the rainforest and knock-on effects. So if you reduce the biodiversity, if you kill off one group of animals, that's going to affect the other animals that depend on it for food, or the animals that it preys on, or the other role that it plays within the rainforest or within its ecosystem. So by destroying the rainforest, we're having an impact on the organisms living there. And lastly, there's also the ethical considerations of biodiversity. At the end of the day, this planet is one that we have to share with all the other living things on Earth. It doesn't belong to humans, it belongs to all of us. And look at the cute baby orangutan, look at its little face, okay? So it's not really very ethical to chop down the rainforest. Okay, here's a peat bog. The next part of our lesson is all about peat bogs. What do you think lives here? Pause it, have a think or have a chat, and when you're ready, press play. So before I recorded this lesson, I actually wasn't aware of exactly how biodiverse peat bogs are. And I went on the internet and I found a website for Northumberland National Park, which has large areas of peat bogs. And one of the things it said on there was that cooler and wetter conditions produce a layer of peat known as a blanket bog. Here, species such as cloudberry, this is cloudberry, and crowberry grow. I don't know if you've ever had cloudberries or crowberries. I've never had crowberries, but I have had cloudberries and they're really yummy. The bog plant cotton grass has been used in the past for making candle wicks, stuffing pillows, and even dressing wounds. So, all these plants are useful to us as well as the animals. It is also food for the large heath butterfly and the black grouse. So all of these organisms live in peat bogs, and again, biodiversity is important. We want our species to survive because they have potentially good uses, especially cloudberries because they're yummy, and we don't want these organisms to die out, and they rely on each other in order to survive. So what exactly is peat? Well, as per the previous slide, it's a type of soil layer. It takes millennia to form, millions of years. Now, it doesn't take us very long to dig it up and destroy it. So, it's actually being destroyed at a faster rate than it could ever be replaced. And peat is made up when plants don't fully decay. And what happens is the plant matter dies, it sediments, it lies down on the ground, but it doesn't fully decay. And that's because in a peat bog, the conditions are very acidic, and the liquids, the water there is very oxygen poor. It's not rich in oxygen. That means that microorganisms that need oxygen can't live there and decay the plant matter and break it down. So the plants don't fully decay, and you get this very rich, wet, acidic sort of layer of soil. And as we saw on our previous slide, peat bogs are a very unique, rich and biodiverse ecosystem. And I've put a picture of some Venus flytraps in here because you get a lot of carnivorous plants have evolved and managed to grow in the inhospitable conditions of a peat bog. The Venus flytraps are actually found in peat bogs in sort of America. And I don't know if you've learned about Tollund Man in history. I remember learning about Tollund Man when I was in Key Stage 3. And what happened was is that it was in the 1950s, and there was some, I think it was in Ireland, some people were digging up peat for human usage. And they came across a body of a dead man who had been hanged. So this is a rope around his neck. And he lived in the 4th century BC, so that when carbon dating was done on his body and dating techniques, they found out that's how long he'd been buried in the peat bog. And you can see, actually, you would expect someone who died in the 4th century BC would have decomposed, there'd be nothing left of him but a skeleton. But because there is no decomposition happening, or hardly any decomposition happening in the peat bogs, and the conditions are acidic, and there's no microorganisms, his body didn't get broken down, it got preserved in the peat bog, which was a really interesting historical find. But it gives you an idea of how long that peat's, well, it's been longer than 4 BC, but also how slowly things decay or basically don't decay in a peat bog. So why are humans destroying peat bogs? Well, actually, this annoys me because it's really frivolous. So firstly, peat is very rich in nutrients and nitrates. So gardeners like to use peat, so it gets dug up and they take it down the garden centre and sell it to people, and people put it in their garden as a fertiliser. Another reason peat is used is for burning. Now, historically, people used to burn peat, but back in those days, there was less humans in the world. They didn't have many different sources of fuel, so they burned peat, and that was okay because it wasn't like they were burning loads of it. But nowadays, we know better. We have different fuels. We don't need to burn peat, but there are still websites to this day selling peat, and their reasons for burning it are so frivolous. So let's say you have an open fire in your house and you like burning coal or charcoal or wood on your open fire in your house. You don't need peat, but some people burn it because peat nuggets give off good heat, great aroma, and turn into a glowing block similar to coal. They are very popular due to their low cost, long burn, and steady heat emission. So as you can see, This was actually for about a 28 kilo bag and it cost £5.69. It's like, well, that's really bad. You shouldn't be selling it that cheap because actually we need peat in our environment. We don't want peat to be destroyed. It says here, clean cut peat from managed peat fields in Aberdeenshire. Managed makes it sound like they're being really eco-friendly. But how can they be? It's not like they can make more peat or replace it. Once it's gone, it's gone. So yeah, it makes me annoyed. So here's your next task. You are working for the environmental agency and need to persuade gardeners to stop buying and using peat, and you want them to make their own compost instead. So the key things here is that gardeners need to stop buying and using peat, and you want them to make their own compost instead. Turns out that the Parliament have allowed you to propose 3 new laws that your MP is going to take with them because you're working for the Environmental Agency, so you're helping out one of the MPs. What new laws will you write? So I want you to think of 3 new laws that you would write in order to try and meet these objectives here. Okay, pause the video, write 3 new laws, and then I'll share with you some of the things I came up with. Okay, you might have got something completely different, and that's okay too, because everyone's going to have a different answer for this, but I just thought I'd share my ideas. So I thought that firstly, it should be illegal to destroy and dig up peat bogs. I also think it should be illegal to sell peat. There's really no need for it. And you could also incentivize composting. So you could offer a scheme to help gardeners get free compost bins. So, put a bit of investment into helping people to make their own compost in their gardens. Some other examples I thought of, but like obviously I was restricted to 3 laws, but I was thinking, if you close down the peat industry altogether, that might make people lose jobs and cause unemployment problems. So you could potentially increase the taxes on peat while simultaneously decreasing tax on the sales of compost. Or, in order for people not to lose their jobs, you could encourage peat industries to move into compost making instead in the compost industry. Here's your next task. What I would like you to do is write down these 6 sentences and at the end of them write T for true or F for false. Pause the video and then I'll go through the answers. Okay, here's the answers then. Rainforests and peat bogs are carbon stores. This is true. So plant matter contains carbon and that is stored inside that biomass. So yes, rainforests and peat bogs are carbon stores. They keep carbon from going back into the atmosphere. Biodiversity is important for human uses only. That is false. Biodiversity is important for ecosystems to be maintained and also for ethical reasons. Question 3. Cows burp and fart nitrogen, a greenhouse gas. That is false. What they actually release is methane, also known as, chemical formula is CH4. That is a greenhouse gas. Question 4. Peat bogs are not very biodiverse. That's false. They are biodiverse. Burning trees and peat releases CO2, carbon dioxide. That is true. Rice paddy fields give off methane, a greenhouse gas. That is true. Okay, so how much have you learned this lesson? We can find out by doing an exam question. So this question, you get 2 marks for it. So you've got 2 minutes. Pause the video and answer the question before you move on to the next one. And here is the second part of the question. It's worth 4 marks, so take 4 minutes to answer it. Those 4 minutes are for reading the question properly before writing the answers down. So pause the video, you've got 4 minutes to read the question carefully and then write down your answer. Okay, so here's the answer for the first question. An increase in rice fields would increase the amount of methane in the atmosphere, and the destruction of peat bogs increases the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere too. Okay, so if you've drawn any extra lines, that will cancel one of those marks, and it's out of 2 marks, so give yourself a score out of 2. Question B, part 1 said deforestation also affects the atmosphere. Give 2 reasons why deforestation takes place. and you can have any out of 2 from these bullet points. So to provide land for farming or agriculture, for quarrying, which you'll have learned about in chemistry, to provide land for building, to provide wood for building materials, or fuel or paper. So if you've written any of these 2 bullet points, you get the 2 marks. And the answer to the last question. Changes in the gases in our atmosphere can cause global warming. Give 2 possible effects of a rise in the Earth's temperature. And again, you should know this from chemistry and also from your Key Stage 3 work. So for example, changes to the Earth's climate, so an increase in droughts or flooding, hurricanes or other extreme weather conditions. If you've put temperature rise, that is not worth a mark because we're actually asking for the effects of a rise in the Earth's temperature. So all you're doing, if you put temperature rise, all you're doing is repeating the question. Okay, allow polar ice caps to melt. So if you've written the polar ice caps will melt, that's worth 1 mark. Rise in sea levels is also worth 1 mark. A reduction in biodiversity, a change in migration patterns, or it may change the distribution of species. So any of those answers is worth 1 mark. Now, if you've written anything about acid rain, the ozone layer or forest fires, they are not worth a mark for a maximum of 2. So I'm hoping you all got 6 out of 6 on that exam question. If not, consider your objectives and assess yourself. Can you describe what deforestation and peat bog destruction are? How confident are you? And can you link the loss of forests and peat bogs to environmental effects? Again, consider how confident you are. And if there is anything you think you need to do a bit more further study on, check out the YouTube channels I always recommend. So Primrose Kitten, Free Science Lessons, Cognito, or the Amoeba Sisters are all good ones. You could check out your Caboodle book, it's the Biology AQA book, page 290 and 291. Or you could use other websites such as BBC Bite Size, GCSE Pod, or Seneca Learning. Thanks for all your hard work, everyone, and I'll see you in your next lesson.